I am a 22-year-old Japanese girl at the moment, and I have an uncle who is way ahead of me in age, around 40. He is the youngest of my dad's brothers. I knew him from the time I was born until I was 10 years old. Truth be told, while I was growing up, everything was fine between us. He never acted weird, but oddly enough, my mom always told me to be careful around him. When I turned 9, I moved with my mom to another city, quite far away, and that's when my mom started telling me weird things about him and my grandfather. Hearing that sounded gross to me, although I have to admit I doubted her version, since my mom is one of those people who tends to exaggerate everything, so I had no idea how much truth there was to her warning until I turned 17. Around that time, my dad's family got together in town, and it was generally pretty nice. I got to see my cousins, especially Emily, who was a year older than me, and we were always good friends, so we took advantage of the occasion and caught up. But I also met my uncle again, and during that encounter, although I regret it now, I was perhaps too friendly. He, who already looked much older, with a big belly and almost completely bald, really surprised me. He used to be like the typical popular TikTok guy. I mean, he was handsome, and he was always partying and with a lot of friends. The meeting was pretty good, very enjoyable, and the atmosphere was fantastic. My uncle behaved as usual, very nice and bubbly as he had been since I knew him. That's why he was so popular, I guess. But then, his behavior started to change. While we were talking and sharing, he would look for any excuse to touch me. Like, for example, he would put his finger on my neck or chin to turn my face towards him, like in a cheap romantic movie. It wasn't in inappropriate areas, but it was weird that he was constantly looking for that kind of contact, and it started to give me a bad feeling. In my culture, men shouldn't touch women even if they are friends, so this made me uncomfortable. None of my other male relatives had behaved that way except for my grandfather. I remember one time at my cousin's house where he was also. I'm not quite clear what happened, but I heard my uncle whisper something about my shyness as he got too close to my neck. His hot breath sent a shiver down my spine, but this time, he wouldn't leave me alone and kept asking me questions, forcing me to interact with him. In my culture, we women are told to be polite and not to make a scene, so I always made a sort of childish grimace whenever accidentally our eyes met, as I felt watched all the time. The conversations I had with my uncle seemed like a constant attempt to pull me into whatever topic was being talked about. He was always asking me questions, trying to include me, as if to keep my attention on him. I would try to play busy, but he really was insistent. I remember once, after he got a little too close to me, I found him looking at my purse while I was off to the side. He seemed to freak out and quickly tried to act like he wasn't doing anything strange, but of course that was weird. At the end of the day, we were on the couch and he was petting my cousin's cat. As he was leaving, I wanted to think it was a normal goodbye, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me to him. Honestly, I felt very uncomfortable, like he was violating my personal space. It was almost like I was cornered, and that felt creepy. He said a couple of things that I can't quite remember because I was overcome with disgust and panic, as what he was doing was completely out of place in our culture. In Japan, men don't grab women like that, not even a husband his wife. I tried to pull back, but he squeezed me tighter. I felt like he was going to break my wrist. I was scared to death, but suddenly he looked over my shoulder, then he let go of me, smiled at me funny like nothing was wrong, and walked away. When I turned around, I saw that my dad was standing a couple of feet behind me. He had witnessed part of that whole horrible moment. He gave me a funny look, but then went to see the others off. As soon as I got home, I told him everything that had happened, and fortunately, my dad told me that I was right to tell him, and that he would talk to my grandmother so she could resolve the issue. However, none of that happened. Instead, my dad decided to keep me away from my uncle, and didn't want him to come into the house, so I would always make excuses for him not to go. Also, he would tell me not to open the door for him if I was alone or with my brother only. But still, my uncle was still weird. One time, he was shooting a video for my little cousin's birthday, but there were times when he would just stand there filming me and I felt very uncomfortable. My dad would keep an eye on me and protect me while he was around. Another time, my uncle came running to the door like crazy to deliver us a meal my grandmother had prepared. It was late at night and he didn't do the same with my other cousins. That time, my dad reminded him that we wouldn't open the door for him if we were alone, but my uncle didn't like that, of course, and he acted offended, even got mad at my dad. The strangest thing is that he suddenly had a baby, but he never introduced his wife or anything. And I really don't understand why he seems to follow me specifically, because he doesn't behave that way with my other cousins. I wish I had always listened to my mom and stayed away from him from the first time I met him. I really wish I could stay away from him someday because I find him really disturbing. For now, I just try to keep him away in a cordial way, but I'm always very careful when he's around. I'm pretty sure that in every neighborhood in the world there is a family of crazies. Whenever I talk to anyone about these things, everyone seems to remember a weird neighbor or group of neighbors, either from when they were little or from their current life. And what I've taken away from all those anecdotes is that when there's a family like that out there, it's only a matter of time before something blows up. That's exactly what happened with a wacky family that lived near my house when I was growing up. In most cases, the blow-up was the result of some family fight that ended in a confrontation with the neighbors on the street. Something along the lines that things just got out of control. They called the police, made a couple of arrests, and typically put up a couple of for sale signs in their windows. But truth be told, I wish my story was that simple or had ended so smoothly. What happened in my case still haunts me and has consequences that really scare me. I grew up in a small Irish community during the 1980s. Our community was super tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone, and of course they got into each other's business more than enough. I remember there was a kid whose name was Ben, and he was the youngest son of the Robinson family, a pretty common last name for a strange family. But that's not the reason I'll never forget him. The Robinsons were really weird. That's the word that best describes their essence. They were really disturbing. I remember one of the first times I saw Ben was during an assembly in elementary school. It was around 8 o'clock in the morning, and all of us kids were sitting in the assembly hall in absolute silence, except for our principal, who was making some announcements. But while this was going on, Ben's sobs could be heard loudly throughout the classroom. He wouldn't stop crying. It wasn't just a soft cry, but it was increasing in intensity until a teacher had to take him out of the room because he couldn't stop. I remember feeling very sorry for Ben at the time, but eventually you get used to things, and they simply gained a reputation as the odd family in the neighborhood. And since they didn't get into serious trouble with others, people just left them alone. The next strange event was years later, in high school. Suddenly, all eyes were on the schoolyard, where a bunch of students had gathered, mumbling things and laughing at someone. They were all glued to the school gates, laughing and whispering at the sight of a boy dressed entirely in uniform, except for one important detail. He wasn't wearing pants. Turns out that boy was Ben. According to what I heard, his father had kicked him out of the car in a rather rude manner. The story circulating was that Ben wasn't ready when his father decided to drive him to school, and instead of waiting for him to put on his pants, his father dragged him out to the car as is, without pants, to give him a lesson about punctuality. I don't know if that's true, but what I do know is that I saw him walk into school wearing only his t-shirt, shoes, and underwear. I couldn't believe it. How could a father subject his own son to humiliation like that? And to tell you the truth, I don't know how Ben was still living with such troubled and mean parents. It was said that social workers had visited their home, which seemed to be true because for a while, there weren't many incidents reported from the Robinson family. Maybe that visit made them change their attitudes, or so it seemed, but it all came to a head when Ben was 16, shortly before we finished high school. One morning, he arrived at school in his own clothes, a pair of fancy shoes and a super colorful sweater. A teacher, who was surely aware of what was going on at home, pulled him aside. I heard Ben whisper something to him just before they went into the main office together. The next thing I knew, Ben, in addition to the shoes he was wearing, had a brand new school uniform, a new jacket, tie, and sweater. From that moment on, he seemed almost like a different person. His parents would no longer drop him off at school, and he was more confident and open with others. He even started playing basketball with us during lunch, something he had never done before. We actually became good friends for a while, and on several occasions he invited us over to his house. Of course, we always said no with some excuse, simply to avoid going to the Robinsons' cold house. However, everything seemed to indicate that something was changing for him. But after a long weekend, Ben didn't show up at school, and that really started to make everyone curious. Normally, kids would miss a day or two every now and then, but Ben was absent for a whole week, and that started to get people talking. I guess because I was so young and naive, I didn't connect the dots about what was going on, and I never thought there was any connection between the problems in town and Ben's absence from school. One Saturday, my parents called me into the kitchen and asked me if I had been at Ben's lately. I told them no, but that he had invited me over at some point. Upon hearing that, my mom gave my dad a strange look, one that seemed to be a sort of mixture of horror and relief, as if he had dodged a bullet. Soon after, I heard at school that there had been a brutal double homicide in town and that someone had been arrested. That was the craziest thing that had happened in decades in our quiet community, where nothing ever happened. I remember the worst thing that had happened in a long time was a carjacking over 5 years ago, so the idea that there were 2 murders was unbelievable, and speculation quickly began as to who the killer might be. Looking back, I understand why the adults wanted to keep us out of it all. It was only a few years later that I understood that the police had gone to great lengths to protect the identity of whoever had committed the murders, and that was because he was a minor. Eventually, rumors reached our ears and began to link Ben's sudden happiness to what had happened. Later, I understood that he himself had ended his parents' lives, which had freed him from a home full of torment. The strange thing is that I could never understand how the death of his own parents could make a child happy, but I guess that was because I was privileged to grow up in a loving home with very normal parents who always took care of me and treated me with love and respect. Looking back and putting all the pieces of that chilling puzzle together, it's overwhelming to think of all the things Ben had to go through to make a decision as drastic and scary as that. For example, the day he arrived at school in those new clothes was probably the morning he ended their lives. His original uniform had been stained with blood, and perhaps that's why he got rid of it. While he was inviting us to watch TV or play, his parents could have been dead in the room upstairs. If we had gone in, we might have smelled something strange or seen flies around the door. It's a disturbing thought, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had gone in and found out what he did to his parents. Would he have murdered us too? I'm really very thankful I didn't have to find out. Mothers are usually always the pillar of the home, the person you go to when you have a problem or need advice and guidance. We often say that a mother's love and wisdom is the most godlike. However, this popular saying is far from being true for me. My mother was always a complete psychopath, and as the years went by, she only got worse, to the point of doing something unthinkable. When I was little, I remember one day she absolutely made a spectacle of my brother at his school, just for finding cigarettes in his backpack when he was 17. It was such an embarrassing scandal that it caused the police to have to intervene. Back then, his craziness could erupt at any time, although compared to now it was almost calm. Today I am about 31 years old and no longer live with her. So let me tell you the beginning of this horror story. It came one day when I came home from a long day at work. I was 24 at the time and still very nervous. I couldn't move because I wasn't earning enough. There was always someone insisting that I look for a better job, but I had changed several times, and they paid the same everywhere. I could have moved in with a friend, but I didn't have a spare room at the time. The thing is, that day, when I got home after 10 p.m., my mother started to make a fuss, and I, full of nerves, couldn't stand it anymore. She got angry simply because I arrived after dark. What did she want? I had a job that asked me to stay there until everything was done, plus I should be grateful that I was the one who paid the rent and covered most of the expenses, but she was furious and kept insulting me. So, in the middle of the fight, I told her that I would move out soon and that I would never come back. I was sick of living like I was on eggshells, and that life shouldn't be like that, much less at that age. She kept yelling until I started packing my things, and that same night I got in a friend's car and left. I never had a car of my own until I moved out, and my friend helped me get one. I spent weeks sleeping on the floor of her house until she was able to free up a room. It was only after a month that I had my space. But just when I thought my life was going to start blossoming, my mother found out where I was and started harassing both of us. First, she started begging me to come home, but I told her that the ship had already sunk and I was happy to be out of there, always stressed by her presence and being checked up on at every turn. My mother was an extremely volatile person, and I could never be calm, as I didn't know when she was going to kick up a storm. She doesn't have a disorder or anything like that. She just needs everything to be the way she wants it to be, even if it was going to cost her family peace. That's why Dad left. And truth be told, I understand that so much. When she would show up early, honking her horn and waking everyone up between 3 and 4 in the morning. The first few times I went outside to tell her to go away, and she would try to drag me to the car, saying she would take me home by force if necessary. She had no problem showing up at my friend's house all the time and making a spectacle of herself. No matter if all the neighbors were witnesses and putting us through horrible embarrassment. That day she was completely freaking out, and even started yelling at my friend, telling her that she had brainwashed me. When someone says something like that, it means she doesn't know what else to come up with to blame someone else for what she alone caused. I told her that she was a psychopath, and if I left the house it was because no one could live with a person like her, that no one but her was to blame for everyone around her running away. Yes, I know they were harsh words, but it was also hard to put up with her madness and disrespect. She left in a huff that morning, and I didn't see her again for a week. The next time I saw her, she showed up at my work and tried to drag me home. My boss told her to leave or he would call the police. She insulted him as she did my friend and anyone who got in her way. But when she saw that he was serious, she left again and never returned to my work. I was worried about losing my job, so I spoke to my boss and apologized 1,000 times for the spectacle, but he was very understanding and assured me he wouldn't fire me. After all, it wasn't my fault I had a nightmare mother. After that, everything was peaceful for almost a month, and I really thought that he had resigned himself and would let me live my life in peace, but I was very wrong. Thanks to my friend giving me a cheap car and paying for my license, I finally had a decent means of transportation. I started going to work more easily, and little by little I got a better job in the neighboring county. But one day, as I was driving to work, all hell broke loose. Just as I was pulling off the road, a car hit me on the driver's side. The impact was so hard that my head smashed against the window violently, and I was knocked unconscious almost immediately. But when I came to, I saw my mother get out of her car to yell at me one more time, telling me that this was what I deserved for everything I had done to her, that I was ungrateful and I quote, evil bitch and deserved to die. In short, she had done it on purpose. But that wasn't even the creepiest part. She told me that if she had given me life, she also had the right to take it away from me, and it was just what I deserved for abandoning her. I couldn't believe she was telling me that, or that she had actually tried to murder me on purpose. It was absolutely terrifying. If I was afraid of her before, now I was terrified of this woman. After insulting me and threatening to kill me, she got into her car and drove away. Immediately afterwards, I called the police and told them what had happened. When the officers arrived and heard my testimony, they were quick to go after her and arrest her. She resisted and tried to run away until she finally had to stop after a patrol car blocked her in El Paso. Once at the police station, she had no problem admitting what she had done and why she did it. My mother was convicted of attempted vehicular homicide and is currently serving a 7-year prison sentence. To this day, I can't explain how she got to the point of trying to kill her own daughter with her car, and if I am honest with you, beyond how painful it is for me to think about the kind of mother I got, I don't feel sorry for her. On the contrary, she got just what she deserved. Since then, my life has been getting better little by little. My friend and I started talking about moving into a house she owns, since her parents passed away when she was young and she now had the option to sell it. I am happy that she is out of my life now, and while deep down I really wish we could have a good relationship sometime, I am also not going to do anything to get close to her until she shows me that she really wants to change, if she does. Let me tell you about my Uncle Jorge, such an unbalanced guy who really made us all worry about our safety. This all triggered a major incident that led to us banning him from going near any of our family forever. For some reason, Jorge married my mother's younger sister when I was about 5 or 6 years old. After he got married, he was in prison for assault and stayed there for a few years, so I didn't spend time with him until I was about 7. My first memory of him was when he showed up very high at one of my rugby games, acting like a lunatic on the sidelines, yelling and cursing at the girls he was playing with and ruining the fun for everyone. Someone eventually threatened to call the police, and that made him leave since he was on probation. He and my aunt had 3 children, 2 girls and a little boy, in about 10 years. The oldest is about 3 years younger than me, so during family gatherings I usually spent time with her, which unfortunately meant having to deal with her situation. In truth, I don't think I ever saw my uncle sober. He was always drunk. It was common knowledge that he was abusive, both physically and verbally, to my aunt. Many times we would call my mom to come get her and the kids because he was beating her. Of course, we would tell her to leave, but she, no matter how hard we tried to help her, would always go back to him, and then he would hit her again, creating an endless cycle. This went on for years, and it was noticeable that it affected the children as well. They were misbehaving and aggressive, but who could blame them? Their life was full of violence. There were times when someone in the family would call the police or child protective services, but nothing ever happened, and my aunt would get angry because she felt we had betrayed her trust just by trying to help her and the children. One time her daughter did call the police because there was a fight, and her oldest daughter, who was about 9 years old, tried to intervene, and in her call, she mentioned that he tried to hit her too. When the cops arrived, they arrested him for domestic violence and threatening officers. We were so happy for them, but good things don't last. A few days later, she sold his PlayStation to get him out of jail, and when he came home and saw that she had sold his device, he hit her again for it. Yeah, he was a really mean and vicious guy. Just to give you an idea, I'll tell you a few short stories I remember before I get to the climax of it all. The moment when this ticking time bomb exploded and nearly wiped out everything in its path. A few years after she called the police, we were at the house on vacation. I don't know which one exactly, but I think it was Easter. It was my parents, me, my brother, and his family of 5. We didn't want Jorge to be there, but we did want to see my aunt and cousins, and he just showed up with them. The 3 kids and my little brother were sitting at the table while my mom served them food. I was helping, and my dad and Jorge were in the living room next door. My mom handed my brother a plate, and my aunt was preparing some dishes in front of her children. Since my mom didn't need to serve me anymore, she went and took the food to my dad in the living room. I was preparing mine while my aunt was giving her plate to her youngest son. Suddenly, Jorge came in a rage, walked up to my aunt, cornered her against the stove and yelled at her that she should have served him first and not the kids, that he was the man of the house and she should serve him first. She was yelling so loud my ears hurt. Then he grabbed the older boy's plate and planted it on my aunt's chest with a thud. He told her to put more food on it, and then sat down right in front of everyone to eat with an angry beast face. "Be aware that if you ever do this again, I'm going to rip your throat open," he told my aunt, right there in front of everyone. I was in shock, as was my whole family. It was shocking to hear that, especially at the dinner table. When she looked at her children to see their reaction, they were sitting there with their heads down and their faces expressionless, as if it was normal for them. It was heartbreaking. None of us knew what to do. When he finished, he told my aunt to serve him more. Then she very nervously prepared a new plate for him, and he snatched it from her before going out to the living room and sitting down now to eat on the couch. She then prepared another one for her oldest daughter, and the kids started eating. I looked at my mom and quickly grabbed my plate so I could eat in my room and not have to be there. From that day on, I told my mom that if anything like that ever happened again, to let me know so I could hide in my room. Eventually, my brother and I started hiding in our rooms if we knew he was coming, which was very sad because we no longer wanted to spend time with our cousins who we loved very much. But it was scary to be around this man. Later that summer, we had a small inflatable pool in the backyard that was barely 4 feet deep. One of those circular ones you buy anywhere that we've all had in our house at one time or another. My mom came into my room and asked me if I wanted to go swimming with her, my aunt and my cousins, so I said yes. Since Jorge wasn't around, I put on a 2-piece bikini and was about to leave when my mom came flying back. I also want to add that I was about 14 years old at the time. She looked at me and said he wanted to swim too, so I quickly put on a t-shirt and shorts and swam fully clothed. It was really uncomfortable, but I knew my mom was looking out for me. A few minutes later, we were in this cheap little pool and Jorge says he wants to make us a wave pool. We all started walking around in a circle to make the water spin, which was fun, but I noticed his 2 youngest kids were struggling. The middle child was maybe 7 and the youngest was about 4 and clinging to her mother on the ledge of the pool. Well, those 2 were obviously struggling to touch the floor of the pool, and the middle child kept sliding under the water, while the youngest one had tears in his eyes because he couldn't let go of his mother, as the water was moving too fast for him to flow. So we all stopped turning the water, except for Jorge, who kept walking and began to get frustrated that we weren't helping him keep the pool turning. The middle daughter looked like she was drowning, so I grabbed her arm and pulled her up the ladder so she could catch her breath. The water slowly stopped moving because no one was helping, and he got angry saying that there was no one helping to make the pool more fun and that he was tired of trying to show us a good time. The kids were happy when everything calmed down, even though he used pretty strong words. Then he went to the ladder to get out of the pool, and when he saw the girl there, he grabbed her and threw her in the water so he could get out. Since I was there, I caught her and kept her afloat while looking at my mom, who looked as surprised as I did. The kids started swimming happily now that he was gone, and my aunt lit a cigarette as if everything was normal. Even the kids were so happy to be able to play, they ignored all the craziness he did. It was sad to see how they had normalized such an abusive situation. There were many more horrible things he did here and there, but I would need at least 3 more videos to be able to exhaust all the stories of this scary guy. So I will jump straight to the most chilling fact, the one that made me to be here today sharing that story with you on a horror channel. I was 16 years old, and that day, my dad and his brother were repairing a window in our living room. My Uncle Tom's kids were about 5 and 4, and they were running around the house playing. My 12-year-old brother was in his room with his video games, and my mom was cooking. I was also in my room watching TV when I heard a truck pull up outside. To give some context, we live in an isolated location and are the only house miles away. We have a long driveway, so people don't usually stop here. I walked out into the living room and saw my mom glued to the door looking out the window. I asked her what was wrong, and she said the guy in the truck had stopped, which was weird because there are never people at our house. I got nervous, but since my dad and Tom were there, I thought everything would be fine. However, to put my mind at ease, I told Tom's boys to go to my brother's room to play. They left, and my brother came down shortly after asking why we sent them with him. We explained that there was a stranger there and he just went back to his room, letting the kids play. My mom kept looking out the window at the people, and I wandered around, wondering what was going on. What was going on was that Jorge was there, and that was very strange. It had never happened before. That is, him coming home by himself. So I was a little worried. Had he done something to his family? You could expect anything from this guy. After a while, my dad comes in and tells my mom that he and my uncle have to go out to buy some things to fix the window, and that they told Jorge to leave. I didn't like the idea of being left alone with Jorge hanging around. My mom is skinny, and I'm only about 5 feet tall, so we weren't exactly candidates to take on a huge guy who was probably drunk. My mom told Dad to stay until Jorge left and then they'd be back quickly. He nodded and left the house. After a few minutes, I see Dad and my Uncle Tom talking to Jorge, who was trying to find excuses to extend his stay. He said he had lost his phone, and after a few minutes of being like that, my dad suggested he check his pockets, and that's how he found it. Then, he started complaining that he couldn't find his keys, which he had in his hand a couple of minutes before, so he started rummaging through his truck and rummaging through the floor. He kept saying that it was no problem, to go to the store quietly, and that he would leave as soon as he found the keys, as if that would make everyone leave without seeing him. Finally, my Uncle Tom, who had climbed into his truck, found the keys in the cup holder, where it was obvious they were, and threw them to Jorge, who I could tell was already well over his head. I don't agree with the drinking and driving thing, but the truth is that we just wanted him to leave for our safety. The road where we lived was not very busy, so we thought there was little chance of him having an accident. He gloated some more, but after a while of just sitting there in the truck, we finally saw him start up and drive off very slowly. After Jorge left, Dad and Tom got in their car and left for the store, which was about half an hour away in town, while my mom and I were still nervous, so we stayed in the living room, looking out the windows and commenting on how weird everything was. About 5 minutes passed, and then, to our horror, we heard Jorge's truck coming back. And suddenly it parked diagonally, blocking the way for my car and my mom's, meaning there was no way out. Whenever the family came, they always parked on the lawn next to the house, but I don't know why. Now he decided to block our exit just when the men had left. As you can imagine, my mom and I panicked. She told me to run and get my brother and cousins, so that's what I did. I told my brother what was going on, and together we took the little ones into the living room. My mom was in crisis mode and we didn't know what to do. We had no neighbors nearby to run to, and we were quite a distance from town. The window next to the front door was broken, so I was able to peek out a bit and watch something from where my dad and Tom had gone. But then I saw that Tom's car was still parked on the lawn, which let me know that we still had a chance to get to the car before Jorge approached. But now we had no idea where the keys were. Likewise, I grabbed one of my little cousins, while my brother grabbed the other, and together with my mom, we flew out of the house to Uncle Tom's car. Once we got there, we got the kids in as fast as we could, and my brother got in the back seat with them. I, for my part, practically threw myself over the passenger seat, and my mom got behind the wheel. We started looking for the keys in a hurry, and as luck would have it, they were in the cup holder. So my mom started the car without wasting a second, and we got out of there without even putting on our seatbelts. As we were driving into town, she was telling my dad everything on the phone. He obviously turned around immediately and went home as fast as he could, but we went to my grandmother's house. My brother, me, and one of the kids were barefoot. When we arrived at my grandmother Martha's house, she was confused and worried about us. My mom quietly explained to her what had happened and ushered us in. You know, grandmothers are the best. She made us something to eat and put on some movies until my dad called her. Jorge was not in the house. He probably left right after we did, and my dad found no evidence that he had come in. But since we were so scared, we decided to stay with Grandma until my dad finished shopping with my other uncle. When we got home, we were still in shock and told my dad everything. He was not happy and thought we were overreacting. I didn't think Jorge would actually do anything, but my mom and I disagreed. It all seemed very suspicious. He showed up just as Dad and Uncle Tom were leaving, then refused to leave, and then came back just as they left, blocking our cars. I feel like he had bad intentions. He was already a terrible guy, so I'm not surprised he could hurt us. After what happened, I told my parents not to allow Jorge to come to the house, even if it meant we couldn't see my aunt and cousins, but fortunately, after that, my aunt decided to leave him, and they have been separated for more than 10 years, after he gave her a beating that sent her to the hospital. At that time, it was my grandmother who filed the complaint, and Jorge went to prison for a couple of years. Then he was released, but since then he has not tried to contact them. And I think that was the best thing. The boys are much better off without his terrifying presence, and I've managed to create a strong bond with each of them, which is great, because we know there are many stories of abusers who do horrible things when their victims try to move on. Since we were little, my brother was always by my side, but everything changed drastically when he turned 19 and moved out. And after that, I didn't see him much. We had always had a good relationship, so I thought we would stay the same, but we didn't. When he moved out, I moved out too. When he moved out, I did too soon after, and that made my parents very sad. But I felt it was necessary. At that time, I chose a small apartment near them, and I was the only one of my siblings who kept in touch. I talked to my parents almost every day and spent most of the holidays with them, and so the years passed. But we never heard from my older brother again. Until one day, I was making a sandwich when someone knocked on my door. When I opened the door, I found him, my brother. Although he looked completely different, he was almost unrecognizable. It turns out he had come to see me after almost 10 years of absence. He is only a couple of years older than me, and at the time I was 28, so he must have been in his 30s. I invited him in, and after a bit of awkward small talk, he asked to meet me. I had a girlfriend at the time, and we were talking about getting married. But seeing my brother after so long, I immediately agreed without thinking about whether she would like him to stay. When I agreed to have him stay at my house, I thought it would only be for a few weeks, and that's what I told my girlfriend. Fortunately, she didn't have a problem with that, although if she hadn't, I wouldn't have told him to leave either. He was my brother, and there was no way I would deny him my roof over my head. From that day on, my brother moved in and quickly made himself at home. He slept on the couch and, to be honest, took up a lot of my space. He barely moved off the couch for weeks. Although he didn't tell me anything about his life over the last decade, it seemed he had had a complicated life. What was evident was that he had no job already, judging by how he arrived, with only a small bag with his clothes. It seemed he didn't have any belongings either. So during that time I had to take care of everything, and the economy became a bit tight with his presence. One day I asked her if she could look for a job and help with the bills, since she was going to be home a lot, but although she agreed, she never really did. That made my girlfriend very angry, but I kept saying I needed to give her time. How much time does it take for someone to adjust? I was a fool. I thought I should be patient, but there was no point in asking her to do housework when she couldn't even be bothered to get off the couch. One day we had a little confrontation and he decided to leave for a while. After a few days he came back, but behaved exactly the same. Just sitting on the couch doing nothing while I carried everything. Then things got worse. He started bringing drugs into the house. I caught him smoking something I couldn't identify in the laundry room. It wasn't marijuana. So I told him I would give him one last chance, but he needed to quit that and get a job, or he would have to get the hell out of my house once and for all. I didn't mean to be cruel to him, but it was necessary. He acted like he really cared about what I told him and promised me he wanted to change, even though I knew he was lying. One day I came home from work and found him on the couch as usual, but now with some rather suspicious friends he had invited over, and they were passing a joint. I told him I needed him to leave. Then he got really annoyed and planted himself in front of me, and what he said to me left me speechless. "Be careful when you sleep." It was only a threat, but I tried to play it down because of the state I was in. Still, I put up with it for about another month, but it never got better, so I finally kicked him out of the house. I couldn't take it anymore. This happens one morning before I left for work, and when I came back, he was gone. I felt a little bad, but at the same time I couldn't stand it anymore that my brother was abusing my trust the way he was doing. Plus, my life was getting chaotic with him in my house. A couple of days went by and I didn't hear from him until one night when I was coming home from work and found him sitting in my driveway. At that moment, he apologized for earlier, told me he had gotten a job in another city and would be leaving the next morning, then asked me to let him stay that night. I really felt good for him and congratulated him for finally getting his life back on track. That night we celebrated the start of his new life with a couple of whiskey drinks, just a small toast, since I had to work the next day and he had a train to catch. I have always been bad with alcohol, so I had not even finished the first drink when I had already started to feel dizzy, so I decided to go to sleep. The next morning I woke up with a hellish headache and feeling my whole body numb. I didn't understand why I felt so bad, until I came out of my room and found a scene I will never forget. My whole house was empty, and when I say empty, I mean it. There was not a single piece of furniture in my living room and not a single appliance in my kitchen, except for the refrigerator and the built-in stove. Neither was my cell phone, and my wallet was lying on the floor completely empty, just my license and ID. And of course my brother was nowhere to be found. The bastard put something in my drink, and after I was knocked out, he charged my whole house. To be honest, when I saw that, more than angry, I felt very hurt. I couldn't believe he would have been able to do that to me. My girlfriend was furious, and rightfully so. But more than anything, he was my brother, and I didn't want to be the one to take him to prison. And I didn't want to cause that pain to my parents and my other siblings, so I just went back to buy all my belongings. But that day, my older brother died for me. This happened more than 5 years ago, and to this day I don't know anything about him. I don't know what he did with his life, but I guess he went on the same way, since my family has never heard from him again either. I have never told anyone this story except my parents and the policeman who got into the matter. Truth be told, even my husband doesn't know everything that happened. It's been 26 years since that madness, but I still get bouts of nausea, cold sweats, and panic like it was yesterday. I've changed the names for privacy reasons, mostly because I still feel that tremendous anxiety every time I hear my ex-friend's dad's name. It all started when I met Miley in freshman year of high school, when we were 11 years old, and we immediately clicked. In the blink of an eye, we were best friends, had a lot of things in common, and shared a lot of the same classes, so we spent recess, lunch, and even after school together. She knew my family and I knew hers. My parents weren't big fans of hers, but that's because they're kind of snobby. They have money and stuff. Miley's parents didn't work. They lived on allowances and didn't have much. I honestly didn't mind that because she was my best friend. At first, her mom, Sasha, was a sweetheart and always offered us things. She even insisted that I spend time with them. Her dad, Todd, would sometimes drive us to school, as he had an older daughter, Allison, who went to a school for kids with severe mental disabilities. I almost always stayed in the car with Todd while Miley and her mom went to pick up Allison. During one of those waiting times, things between Todd and me took a weird turn. The first time he put his hand on my leg, I was 12 years old. It made my stomach turn, but I didn't understand why. I felt silly because we were just chatting about normal things. The next time he did it, his hand went a little higher and he started squeezing my thigh. Again, we were just talking about trivial things like school or our outings. This became a kind of routine, and he would always pull his hand away just before Millie and her mom came back. When I was 14, a more intense situation occurred. We had to stop at their house to drop off some things, and Todd and I stayed in the car as usual while they went inside. We weren't chatting about anything interesting when he leaned over and kissed me. I was right in front of him, but I turned my face and he just gave me a peck on the cheek. Then he asked me if I was embarrassed, and I said no. I was super embarrassed. But I didn't want to seem rude. I had seen Todd do the same thing with Allison, so I actually thought I was just being silly. For the next 2 years, his behavior didn't change. Hands on my thighs, rubbing my shoulders, hugs that seemed to go on forever, and kisses to say hello or goodbye. The weird thing is that I only realized later that all that happened when Millie and Sasha weren't around. The last time something happened was when I was 16. Miley and her family moved because she got pregnant and they needed a bigger place. I started visiting their house less and less, but we kept in touch by phone every night. After the baby was born, I was invited to spend the night because Miley wanted to tell me something important. My parents gave the okay, so Todd came to pick me up. When we arrived, I learned that Sasha had been in an accident and had pins in her leg, so she was sleeping downstairs. Todd would stay in Millie's room, and Miley and I would stay in Todd and Sasha's room with the baby. Miley, very excited, asked me if I wanted to be her baby's godmother. I jumped up and down with joy, and of course I accepted. A while later, after her parents said goodbye, Miley and I stayed up chatting until 3 in the morning. At some point, I woke up without really knowing why, since I usually slept in one go. It was pitch dark at the time, and I had my head turned with my back to my friend, stretching my legs out. Suddenly, I felt something strange under the sheets. I noticed that my nightgown was riding up and my underwear was also moving. At that moment, I think I fell into a state of shock because I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I wanted to do was scream at Miley or anyone else, but instead I froze. As the darkness began to clear, I finally saw Todd shirtless, hunched over next to me on the bed, one hand under the covers doing something he shouldn't be doing, and the other on his own body. He whispered for me to shut up and offered to go to his room to make things better. I only managed to shake my head as a sign that I didn't want to, but I was freezing. He reacted with a, "well, maybe next time," and got up to leave. At that instant, I realized that he was completely naked, which left me very shocked. I lay there for hours on end, unable to sleep, staring at the door. I didn't cry. I didn't call Millie, nor did I do anything but stand there like a statue, not having the slightest idea what to do. The next morning, as I was getting dressed, still mute, Millie and Sarah were in the kitchen with Allison and the baby. Then, Todd walked into the room and threw a, "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" at me. That statement left me in shock. Before long, I started looking for excuses not to come back anymore, but I kept talking to Millie on the phone. A few months passed, and in a psychology class in college, we discussed the different types of abuse people suffer. At that point, I broke down. The full weight of what had happened to me hit me like a truck. I cried inconsolably, felt hot, shaking and tight in my chest. I thought I was going to faint. When I finally managed to calm down, I talked to the college counselor who suggested I tell my parents. She even got me a cab home. Once there, I told my mom everything that had happened. She quickly told my dad, and together, they decided to call the police. A couple of officers came home a few hours later, and I told them everything that had happened, from when I met Millie to my latest experience with Todd. The next day, Todd was arrested for child abuse. The police warned me that if he denied the charges, I might have to testify in court. Although I was terrified, my parents assured me they would be there to support me. But in the end, Todd didn't deny anything. He agreed to have done more than I remembered. And that's when I learned that sometimes our brains block traumatic memories. I had no idea what else had happened because the police wouldn't tell me, and to be honest, I didn't want to know. It may sound weird, but for me the most painful part was not what he did, but what happened next. Later that day, Miley and Sarah called me in a rage, started yelling at me, questioning why I was lying about Todd, telling me they hated me for spreading falsehoods and that he wasn't like that. All I could do was stand there crying, listening to their reproaches. It was my mom who finally hung up the phone. I felt terrible, bearing the guilt of having broken up his family. Everything finally got sentenced for the abuse he committed on me, and he was in prison for 18 months. Then he was put on the sex offender registry, and because they had a vulnerable person in the family, they were all under CPS Child Protective Services surveillance. Because of this experience today, being a mother of two, ages 5 and 3, I am constantly watching my babies because I am terrified that they might encounter such a degenerate someday. The worst thing is that this kind of cases happen very often, and most of the time the aggressor gets away with it. However, I have no words to describe how much sexual abuse can destroy you psychologically and emotionally. And every time I think about how vulnerable children are to this kind of situations, especially nowadays, my chest tightens and my stomach gets in knots. So, the only thing I can tell you is to take good care of your children and don't trust anyone.